Good morning, everybody. This morning we're going to continue our study of Revelation. We'll be in chapter 17. We have talked up till now about two different kingdoms here. We're going to have the kingdom of the Antichrist, which is an economic kingdom, and we have a religious kingdom, a religious situation, which we're going to study today. So we're going to get more information about the Antichrist, or about the sea beast, the beast from the sea, and we're going to get some markers about the false prophet and the apostate church. In chapter 13, we talked about two different beasts. One beast is from the sea. We called him the Antichrist. He's not called that in Revelation, but that's what he is commonly referred to. He will be a political leader who will rule over an economic system. If there is a world clamoring for a leader who can deliver an economic system, it is now. It will be more so in the last days, the last of the last days, with the Antichrist. The other beast is from the land. He is the false prophet. He's called the false prophet in Revelation. He will be a leader over a one world religious system. He will be head of a counterfeit, I'm calling counterfeit, apostate Christian church. He is a counterfeit Christ. We'll talk about a little more about that, about why I feel that way as we go through this lesson. So let's go back to chapter 13 in review. Let's go back to chapter 13, verse 11. Well, let me just read the whole thing. Verse 11 says, "Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon." All right. This is a very important verse for our study of chapter 17. The apostate church, which will be the only church, basically, because if there is another church, it will be under alliance with this one world church. The leader of the apostate church, the false prophet, will look like Christ in his being portrayed here by the Lamb, but he will be satanic. The church will look Christian. They will call themselves Christian. You know, we've talked about this before many times, that Christianity or Christian is just a word, and it's defined by the person that's using it. We have a particular understanding what Christian means in terms of our salvation, which comes through Christ on faith alone, not based on any teachings of any man, not based on any ideas that we have on our own, but based purely on scriptural definitions of our faith in Jesus Christ alone as our Savior. Anything other than that is going to be something that would have to be considered apostate, and that's what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about a church that looks Christian, purports to be Christian. They will look Christian, but they will have doctrine which is counterfeit to Christian doctrine. There'll be something, it'll have a lot of truth in it, but it's going to have a lot of other stuff that's sprinkled into it that's going to take away the Christian aspect of what their doctrine is, and it'll be an apostate doctrine. Therefore, the church will be what I'm calling an apostate Christian church. There are other religions that are worldwide, such as the Muslim faith, but they are not Christian. They do not figure into this because they're not Christian. They do not purport to be Christian. The church of the end time that I'm talking about will purport to be Christian. They will call themselves Christian. They will look like Christian. but they're not. They're going to speak like a dragon. Today, chapter 17 gives greater definition to these two beasts, the land beast and the sea beast. We'll see that they work together in ruling over the people. This chapter has a long and storied, I want you to listen to this. This chapter has a long and storied past in being used as a text which identifies the woman, which we're going to see in this study of chapter 17, as the Roman Catholic Church. This identification began with Martin Luther, who was a Catholic priest during the Protestant Reformation. In fact, he was responsible for it. There will be more mention of this later in our study. We will see reference to a woman and two beasts. There are also 7 hills and 10 horns. By far the most important figure of this chapter, and the central figure is the woman who rides the scarlet beast, which we'll be reading about. In this chapter, the apostate church emerges. We will see words like prostitute, which means normally a person of ill repute, but here we will see it is a particular person who is, or organization, which is the worldwide church, who is spiritually unfaithful to God, and so leads the people. Another word we're going to see is adultery. Rather than being involved in fornication and infidelity to one's spouse, it is intentional infidelity and spiritual rebellion against God. Another word we're going to see is mystery. In verse 5, I believe it is, the word mystery is written on the forehead of the woman, which we're going to see. Normally a mystery is normally something that can only be known through revelation from God, but here it can mean the mystery religions known in the first century, which reached all the way back to the beginning of the false religions at the Tower of Babel. So it goes way back there, and it's not involved with the Babylon of the Babylonian exile. It's not involved with other occurrences of Babylon throughout the Bible. It goes all the way back to the founding of the original Babylon by Nimrod. We're going to talk a little bit about that also as we go. So let's see. Throughout chapter 7, we will see 10 markers which characterize what is called the scarlet woman who rides the beast. This phrase, the scarlet woman who rides the beast, is found in verse 3. Let me go ahead and put this up on the board. I want to show you these 10 markers before we study it, so you can watch for them as we go along. Let me go through these 10 markers. The top there says chapter 17. I hope you can read this okay. The top of the page says chapter 17. The title is Markers for the Scarlet Woman Who Rides the Beast. Now there's 10 of these that are going to show up in Scripture in chapter 17, and I want you to see this because these are going to be the characteristics of, we've already seen some characteristics of the false prophet, but we're going to see these 10 as additional information about the false prophet, but also about the church over which he will rule. The first one is the great prostitute. It's referenced in verse 1. The second one is she rules over the people of the world in a world which is worldwide in scope, and we're going to see that in verse 1 and verse 15. The third marker is the people willingly follow her. We'll see that in verse 2. The number 4 marker is the woman has unity with the sea beast. There's a union there, an agreement, an alliance. There's some kind of situation working together where the Antichrist and the false prophet are unified in their approach to ruling the people. We're going to see that in verse 3. The 5th marker is she possesses great wealth. It's in verse 4. Number 6 is also in verse 4, in that she is carrying a gold cup filled with abominable stuff. We'll see it when we get there. The number 7 marker has the title mystery. That's found in verse 5. The number 8 marker, she is tied to the original Babylon. That's in verse 5, referenced in verse 5. The original Babylon we're going to see, is the Babylon that was founded by Nimrod. We'll probably go back and look at a little bit of that, because we need to understand this is a serious thing we're going to see. She's called the mother of all of these ancient, I forgot what they call it. She's called the mother of prostitutes. It's talking about all the bogus religions that have been formed. They all come from these mystery religions from the original Babylon. The number 9 marker is found in verse 6. She is persecuting the saints of God. We'll talk a little bit about that and what that means. And then the number 10 marker, you've got to jump all the way to the end of the chapter in verse 18 to find this one. She is identified with Babylon, the city that rules over the kings of the earth. Now the question is, what is that Babylon? We'll have to figure that out when we get to it. She identifies with Babylon, the city that rules over the kings of the earth. So let's get right into it now. We're going to look at the first 6 verses. I'm going to read them, then we'll come back and study those one verse at a time. Verses 1 through 6, chapter 17. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." In verse 3, Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 4, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. Verse 5, the name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. In verse 6, I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. All right, let's get on into it. I'll read verse 1 again, then we'll get going. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." All right. The angel here is one who had one of the 7 bowls we talked about in chapter 16 when we talked about the 7 bowl judgments. So with that knowledge, it is hard to know if this chapter is a continuation of the bowl judgments or if it is a further explanation about the beasts of chapter 13. It does not, I'm wondering if it really matters from our perspective. Some lean toward a continuation of the judgments. We'll see as we go through chapter 18 if that's true, because chapter 18 shows further destruction. I think that 18 is about destruction of the economic Babylon, so to speak. To properly identify the scarlet woman, the sinful woman, is the key to correct interpretation of the scripture. John will give 10 markers, which I've already listed for you, we can use to identify the woman. So we have from chapter 17, we have these 10 markers that are applied to the woman, and we'll see how that helps with our understanding of who she is and what she does. She is the first one is she is the great prostitute. Rather than being a physical attribute, she is unfaithful to God and in full rebellion against him. It is a profound unfaithfulness. It's not a sexual unfaithfulness. It's a spiritual unfaithfulness, and it's a profound one. Here John is invited to see her punishment. It said, come and I will show you. So she wants him to see. She is said to sit on many waters. Normally, we would be faced with having to determine what the many waters are, but we're told exactly what they are in verse 15. Those waters in verse 15 are the people. Let me read verse 15. Verse 15 says, then the angel told me, the waters you saw, which is the waters there in verse 1, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and I didn't read the whole verse, and languages. Sorry. So this is a worldwide situation that she is going to be ruling over these people. Okay, just look at verse 2. So the second marker will be she rules over the people. Let me read verse 2. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. This is not physical adultery. We're talking about spiritual unfaithfulness to God that is led and directed by the false prophet and the church. Again, I suppose the form of the apostate religion allows great latitude as to what they are told that God allows. They're being told how things are. A religion with no teeth in it is probably a little like the people of Micah 1, where they didn't really have to worship. They just had to look like they did. They went through the motions, so to speak. Let me just mention to you Micah 1, verse 7 and verse 9. Micah 1, verse 7 says, all her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy her images, since she gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes. As the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used. There in verse 7, it's the idolatry in Samaria. It's actually in the northern kingdom. And then there's verse 9 says, for Samaria's plague is incurable. That's what it was talking about. Samaria, it has spread to Judah. So what was so terrible that was going on in the northern kingdom in Samaria eventually makes its way to Judah. It has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself. So this worship thing, you to really fully understand how bad things are, you'd have to study the entire book of Hosea, which we did. And we have a whole playlist out there on the study of Hosea. But they had gone so far as to have 2 golden calves. They had intermingled the worship of Baal with the worship of Yahweh to the extent that they couldn't tell the difference. They thought it was the same God called by two different names. Verse 9 was talking about it spreading to Jerusalem. They had their own problems. They were actually worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem to all kinds of ugliness and wickedness and idolatry. Then there's Romans 1, verses 21 to 25. Let's take a peek at that. Romans 1, verses 21 to 25. It's fairly long, but I think it's that we need to understand what we're talking about. That first group looked religious. They were worshiping something. So there is a certain religiosity about them. Wrong as it was, they looked religious. Then Romans 1, verses 21 to 25 says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. So they worship something. So they got to have some kind of religiosity about them and look that way to a certain extent. And verse 24 says, therefore God gave them over in their sinful desires of their heart to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. In verse 25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. All right, so they want to claim God, but they want to worship something else. Outwardly claim him, but worship something else. They want to look religious. Then there was 2 Timothy 3. I think this is going to give us a good foundation for going forward in terms of what apostasy is. 2 Timothy 3, verses 5. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 5. But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last day. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. That's in the last days. That's what they're going to look like. It's going to be all about themselves, but there's going to be a form of godliness, but with no power attributed to it. They're going to look religious in terms of the date in which they're living. So John calls the behavior of the people who followed this scarlet woman adultery, spiritual adultery, not physical adultery, but rebellion against God in favor of something else. Not surprisingly, the leaders also behave this way since they came out of the people. They're going to be like the people. That's how the people are as well. So, all right, now the third marker is the people are willing to follow the scarlet woman. Let me read verse 3. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. So this same angel carries John away to a desert where he sees the scarlet woman. Scarlet means sinful. Scarlet woman is not in the Bible, but she is a sinful woman. So we've got in our notes here the scarlet woman riding on a scarlet beast. Most translations say sitting on the scarlet beast. But if you are sitting on it, you are riding it. If you are riding it, in my heart of hearts, I believe she thinks she controls it. That beast being the Antichrist. She thinks she has control of the Antichrist. Remember, we've talked about this, and this kind of shows what I've already said. There's probably some kind of agreements and alliances between the false prophet and the Antichrist, whereby the false prophet will be allowed with his apostate church to wield a certain amount of power, or actually full power in one particular arena, meaning the religious part of the kingdom. And she's going to think that she's the one that's in control. She's the one that's riding. If you're riding, you're controlling. That's what she thinks. These are alliances and agreements. And I think I just said that we'll see later. The Antichrist actually hates the false prophet and his church. And he's going to do what he can to destroy her. All right, so I think I mentioned this. The scarlet meaning the scarlet woman. Scarlet means sinful or wicked when used as an adjective. The beast on which she is riding is described in exactly the same way as the beast from the sea in chapter 13. 7 heads, 10 horns, blasphemous names, and all that sort of thing. So our fourth marker is union with the sea beast. Between the two, the sea beast and the land beast are going to have some kind of union and unification and unity in their operation. Okay, so verse 4 says this. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This verse describes how the scarlet woman is dressed. Now, if we're talking about a person, we're talking about physical clothing. If we're talking about a church, we're talking about the way the church looks, the amount of decadence, the amount of ornateness in their worship and that sort of thing. Okay. It says she was wearing purple and scarlet with glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. These are symbols of wealth and royalty. It reminds me, this reminds me, I hope you're familiar with this. It reminds me of Herod in Acts 12, verse 21. I want to read this to you because I think it speaks volumes about what we're talking about in the last days. Acts 12, verse 21. Just one verse, you can listen as I read. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. Then verse 22, I guess we go a little further in one verse. They shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. Now, what I remember when I taught Acts about those verses, it seems like for some reason I remember, I seem to remember, I've slept since then, but I seem to remember that Herod's clothes were glittering. Okay, and they spoke to him about him as if he were a god. He didn't agree with them, but he didn't do anything to say no. He showed no humility about it. He just continued to strut. And so what he has actually done here is take the praise of the people as if he were God. And so what he's doing is usurping the glory that should be going to God for himself. The same thing will happen in the end times with the apostate church and its leader. He's going to take the glory for himself. They're going to say things about him, and he's going to do nothing to deter such comments. All right. So our fifth marker is that she possesses great wealth. Number 6, which also comes from that same verse, is she carries a gold cup filled with bad stuff, with abominable things and filthy things, which it spells out there in the verse. Let me read verse 5. The name written on her forehead was a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abomination of the earth. Tied to the original mystery, this is tied to the original mystery religions of Babylon in Genesis 10 and 11. Those two chapters, the original Babylon is mentioned there. They were under direction from Nimrod. It's actually in Genesis 10 verses 8 and verse 10. They were under the direction from Nimrod, the founder of the original Babylon. We don't need to go back and read it, but he was a warrior and a builder, and he founded many things. Babylon was one of them, and they were to build the town. They were to build a tower to make a name for themselves. That's found in Genesis 11:4, and usurp God's power. Martin Luther was the father of the Protestant Reformation, not revolution, although it was a revolution. Father of the Protestant Reformation. One thing that came out of the Reformation is the fact that the papacy, the Pope, does not have divine authority over humans, but he claimed human authority. I want to it's not really a digression, but I want to tell you what I remember about the Pope's visit to San Antonio several years ago. I remember that there was a woman interviewed on the street as the Pope went by in his car, and she said, first of all, she said that he is the closest thing to God on earth. That wouldn't mean sort of close. Many people are close to God, but he is closest. That means over all people, everywhere, the closest thing to God. That's what they say about him. They say he is divine without flaws and that he is infallible. That's part of their doctrine. I think Martin Luther believed that the Catholic Church will one day be the apostate religion with the Pope at the head. Now, that's not what I'm saying. There are many things that have to happen for that to actually come to bear. Part of it is timing of when it actually occurs. But the point I want to make is that regarding to even today, there are things declared about the Pope that are made up in their doctrine and taught to their people, and he does nothing to show humility about that, but just to take the praise and the glory that goes with it. It's a type of usurpation of what is intended for God and God alone. One other thing, I've got it in my notes here. I might as well do it here. It has to do with the title of mystery and Babylon the Great and mother of prostitutes. There are 3 titles in this verse, 3 separate titles. Mother of prostitutes is the Babylonian or Chaldean religions which we brought forward as given in John's vision. She is tied to the mystery religions going all the way back to Nimrod, the founder of Babylon, following the flood. You know, everything was killed out except for 8 people when God sent the flood. And then this is a time after the flood. Nimrod was one of the things, and he carried his sinful nature on, which survived the flood, and started the what became known later as the mystery religions. The Scarlet Woman will be heavily aligned with Babylonian religions founded by Nimrod. Now that's a hard thing to understand unless you understand what it was that they were teaching. As examples, the Catholic Church has carried forward practices of the justification of works, salvation by works, sovereignty of the Pope. One thing which came of the Protestant Reformation was the fact that the papacy, the Pope, does not have divine authority over humans. We are our own priest. We don't need a mediator between us and God except for Christ. Christ is our mediator. He is our salvation. There's a hierarchy of priests. There's a requirement of the confessional to holds power over men. Baptism required for salvation. These are just some of the things that have been brought forward. This is totally anti-Christian to believe such as to deny that Christ did not do enough on the cross. Babylon also had a trinity. It was a father, a mother, and a child. The mother was also worshipped as divine. This is carried forward in the Catholic Church. Now let me tell you what I'm talking about. Nimrod was the first deified man. When I say deified, I mean he called himself God. I am a God. His wife was Semiramis, but between the two, and she became a goddess. He was the first male god. She was the first female god, and between the two, they had a child. His name was Tammuz. I think we'll probably be looking at that again in a minute too. But nevertheless, the mother, derived all of her power from her son. That's the way Mary is today. She's the mother of Jesus. She's a wonderful woman, but she's not a god, though she is treated like one. Her power and her glory comes from who her son was. Now, the Tammuz was said to die every year and be resurrected every year. Die and resurrected, over and again, over and again, over and again. What does that sound like? That's brought forward to the mother of Jesus. There's many other examples. None of this is provided in Scripture. It is all developed by man, not claimed as divinely inspired, but provided by man through research and application. An article I read on the doctrines of the Catholic Church stated, my paraphrase was that though their doctrines are not based on Scripture, one can rest assured that all have been thoroughly researched and you can count on them. So the number 7 marker on our list is she has the title Mystery. Their title, the 3 titles, Mystery, Babylon the Great, and the Mother of Prostitutes, ties the Scarlet Woman to that original religion, which is considered the mother of unfaithfulness. It's the mother from which all bogus religions spring. I will mention to you that that the Old Testament is full of things that came out of the original religions that get brought forward, and modified. They talk about the Asherah poles and the high places where the pagans would worship, which the Israelites eventually got into as well. That's why the northern kingdom was destroyed and why the southern kingdom was taken into exile. It was over those same things. So the number 8 on our list is she is tied to the original Babylon. Right, verse 6 says this: I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. She is a persecutor of the saints of God, particularly believers in Christ. That means Christian. Christian by definition, which means those who have placed their faith in Christ alone for salvation. With the blood, meaning by death. John is said to be greatly astonished when he saw the scarlet woman. It was unmitigated astonishment when he saw what she was doing. I think, and again, it's direction by the false prophet, the church as directed by the false prophet. I think he must be astonished to see a religious system professing something to be that it is not. A religious system purporting to represent God while actually doing the work of Satan. With evidence I've already given from chapter 13, verse 11b, this religious system actually purports to be Christian, but it is not. She was killing Christian people. Back in 1311, I said, let me just look at it one more time. I don't want us to forget it because it's very important. You'll know that the end time apostate church is not the Muslim church. It is a church that purports to be Christian. Chapter 13, verse 11 says, it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It had 2 horns like a lamb. It is a counterfeit Christ, as represented here in this vision as a lamb, which is the way Jesus is represented all the way through the New Testament, but spoke like a dragon. Her doctrines are satanic. They are not Christian. They are not what they purport to be. People are told, this is what Christianity is, and this is our, I have company here, it's my dog. They have doctrine that is used, that they are told is sent from God, but we're told here that it's satanic in nature. Verse 7, then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. This use of mystery is the one we know, which can only be revealed by God. And this is it. The angel will explain the mystery, the scarlet woman, and on the beast she rides. All right. Verse 8 is where it is. The beast which you saw. You may scratch your head and say, wow, that's an explanation I'm supposed to understand. Let's look at verse 8. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. The beast, he was, means he lived. Now he is not. It means that he no longer lives. He seemingly died, by the wound he was given back in chapter 13, verse 3. And he will come up. He will be revived from the abyss, the place of the dead. Okay. And he will be destroyed. But he will be destroyed. While he is waiting to be destroyed, he leads the whole world astray by deceptions and arrogance and charisma. The unbelievers will be astonished with the statements of verse 13:3. Let's see, verse 9 and 10. Let's see, verse 9 and 10. Let me read those. See what we have here. This calls for a mind with wisdom. What this explanation that the angel just gave calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. And verse 10 says, they are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. All right. It will take wisdom to understand the angel. He says wisdom is required. The woman sits on 7 hills, represented by the 7 heads of the beast. Of these heads, 5 have fallen. 1 exists at that time of John, and 1 will come later for a short time. Okay, the 5 are 5 past kingdoms. I believe that they're Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and the Medo-Persians, and then the Greeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the Greeks. There are 5 past kingdoms. And then 1 is the current. The 1 exists at that time of John, and that is obviously Rome. Okay? The 1 to come for a short time is that of the Antichrist. Let's look at verse 11. So we have 5 have fallen, 1 exists now, and 1 will come later. All right, verse 11. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 8th king is the Antichrist, who somehow comes out of a revived Roman Empire. We've talked about that before. The important thing to John is that no matter where he comes from, he will be destroyed. He's going to have power, but he's going to have it just for a little while. He's ultimately going to be destroyed. And John covers that in chapter 19, verse 20. I say to read that, so let's just look at it. We're not studying chapter 19. But chapter 19, verse 20 says this. But the beast was captured, and this is at the, let's see, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these 2 signs, he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. The 2 of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. That's where they end. That's their final zip code. The fiery lake of burning sulfur, the lake of fire. Okay, the kingdom of the beast who was wounded, seemingly, was revived. And that was the Antichrist. All right, verse 12. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. All right. Is it getting confusing enough for you? These 10 horns are 10 kings to come. They have not yet received a kingdom, but will work with the Antichrist, the 7th king, the beast who was wounded and died, so on and so forth. Okay, they will reign with the beast for a very short time. It's called 1 hour in symbolic terms. So he has his kingdom, the Antichrist with the 10-nation confederacy, these 10 kings. So verse 13 says this: they have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. This is apparently a 10-nation confederacy answering to the beast. They will pledge their allegiance to the beast. He say, he's the man, he's the vampus of the campus, he's our leader, we're going to follow him. They answer to the beast, to him, and they have only one purpose, which is expressed in verse 14. That's the purpose. So let's read verse 14. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. The Lamb with his called, chosen, and faithful followers will triumph over the beast. When he comes at the second coming, he will triumph over the beast. That occurs at Armageddon. Jesus will overcome them because he is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. When he comes to fight the war, he will bring with him his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Jack Van Impe, when he was alive, called these the armies of heaven who were raptured before the tribulation. Matthew 24:31, they're called the elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So there's a various number of ways that they've been referred to, but they're coming with Jesus, and I'm going to be with them. All right, verse 15. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw, where the prostitute sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. I've already mentioned it once, but we're going to talk about it here one more time. Her influence is worldwide in scope. The waters you saw where the prostitute sits are people, multitudes, nations, and languages. She rules over that group. She sits by the waters, and the waters are those groups of people. Verse 16 says, the beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. You know, she was riding the beast back in verse 3, I believe it was, thinking, hey, look at me, I got him under control. Not realizing that he hates her. He hates the false prophet, he hates the church. Okay? They will bring her to ruin. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. That just means she's going to be destroyed. But it won't be him that does it. The religious leader, the false prophet, is hated by the Antichrist and the 10-nation confederacy. There was a unified effort between the Antichrist and the false prophet, as evidenced by the woman riding on the scarlet beast back in verse 3. No doubt the Antichrist sought the combining of their influence to suit his own aspirations. Religion invariably plays a part in politics. Whether the leader sincerely has a faith or whether he uses it to his own ends, religion will always be a part of politics. When the usefulness has run its course, the relationship will be dissolved. In this case, the beast will bring the woman to ruin. All right, we're getting close here. Verse 17 says this: For God has put it in their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. God put the desire in their hearts to rule over the earth and man to accomplish his purposes through the beast. He gave them the power for a limited time. He gave them their power for a limited time to get it done. When God's purposes are accomplished, the power he gave to them is withdrawn in the form of war and defeat and the second coming of Christ. They pledged their power to the Antichrist because God allowed it so that his purposes would be accomplished. When those purposes are accomplished, they're going to be destroyed. All right, let's look at verse 18. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. The woman is a city, a particular city that does a specific thing. The number 10 on our list of markers about the woman, the scarlet woman, she is identified with Babylon, the city that rules over the kings of the earth. The woman rules over the kings of the earth. No more debate about it. The woman is the great city. That city is Rome. Rome is from where kings were ruled over. I want to read something to you here from some other notes that I have about that city. And then we'll be done. I think we'll be done. So she's identified with a great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So the question is, how can a religion, the Scarlet Woman, also be a city? This is all symbolism. You got to remember that. How can that be? How can, as a symbol, how can she also be a city? In 312 AD, when Constantine became a Christian, he found that Rome, the current capital of the Roman Empire, was too inconvenient. To get to Rome, Constantine was the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time, and it was too hard to get to Rome. So he built another city that he used as his capital. It's called Constantinople. He declared the new capital to be, getting ahead of myself, he declared the new capital to be Constantinople, and he built the city. He gave Rome to the church, along with the requirement of city government to be the responsibility of the church. He didn't want to go to Rome because it's so hard to get there. So what does he do? He just, he's the new Christian. He's declared Christianity to be the national religion. So everybody has to be one. And there's, again, that's just a word. I don't know that everybody actually became Christian, but the national religion was called Christianity. And so he gives to the church, he gives the city of Rome, along with responsibility to maintain the city and rule the city. Oh, by the way, if you read books about this, there are books, many books, much written information about this. You will also find books that say this never happened. So you're immediately faced with whether you want to believe it or not. Well, it certainly seems true to me, but I will tell you, 2,000 years from now, we're looking at 2,000 years, 1,500 years ago, more than that, 1,800 years ago, is when this happened in the year 312 AD. So that's 1800, call it 2,000 years in round numbers. 2,000 years from now, you will find, someone will find books that say the Holocaust never happened. So those people 2,000 years from now are going to be faced with a decision like I'm telling you, you've got to be faced with right here. Did the Holocaust happen or didn't it? There are people that write books to fulfill their own agenda. All right. Now, this makes sense to me. It's consistent with what the Bible says, and I choose to believe it. Constantinople gave the church to, gave the city of Rome to the Scarlet Woman with the responsibility of maintaining the city and running the government. Okay. That city is now known as Vatican City. The woman called the great prostitute, who is the apostate religious system, is now in fulfillment. If there is any doubt that the great city is Rome, see verse 9. Verse 9 says, calls for a mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. The 7 hills. The 7 heads of her appearance are 7 hills. Everybody knew Rome sat on 7 hills. I'm sure that other cities may sit on 7 hills as well, but are they the seat of a world religious system like the Catholic Church is? Probably not. Until one can be identified, I believe the city is Rome. All right, I believe we're through for today. That is a fairly in-depth look at a prophecy about a one world religion which will exist on the earth in the last days. I want to remind you, in at least 2 times today, I have told you that it will be an apostate church. When I say apostate, I don't think I really defined what that is. Apostate means it purports to be one thing, but it is not. In this case, the church will say, I am Christian, but it is not. It will look Christian, but it is not. It will look religious, but it is not. One of the most important things about that is that it will be Christian. The Muslim religion will not be the church, will not be the one world leader, because they don't purport to be Christian. There's nothing about them that makes them that look like a lamb that we saw over in chapter 13. It said he looked like a lamb with 2 horns, but spoke like a dragon, spoke like Satan. They probably speak like Satan, but nevertheless, they're never purported to be looking like the lamb. The lamb is a Christian symbol. The lamb is Jesus Christ. So the apostate church in the end time will purport to be Christian, but it will not be. All right, that's all I have for you today. Our next study will be chapter 18. It is about the demise of the one world economic system, I believe. So we'll talk about that then. Thank you for being with me today.